My name's Kim Delaney, and I have the good fortune of working with the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, responsible for transportation and land use matters. This morning, this panel is on transportation infrastructure trends. I want to introduce our esteemed panel. Is this too loud, by the way? It feels loud to me. Okay, I'm just hearing myself. I know what my kids feel like now when I'm yelling across the room. So you have 4 panelists for you this morning, so I wanted to take a chance to introduce them before we get started. Working across this stage from my left, so from your right, Peter Halliburton is a principal with Cambridge Systematics, and Peter has broad knowledge across the spectrum in transportation planning, national and international experience. Peter heads up the transportation planning practice for the Southeast, based out of Fort Lauderdale. His focus is multimodal transportation planning and operations. Prior to Florida, he also worked in the Pacific Northwest, the UK, and South Africa. And so that is Peter Halliburton, who will be covering the rail part of the transportation network. Bill Johnson, sitting to his left. Bill is the former director of the Florida Airports Council and has a broad array of airport planning experience, both public and private sector. Bill's background includes managing, directing the Tallahassee Airport, the Fort Lauderdale Airport, economic development in 2 cities, both Fort Lauderdale and Tallahassee, and he was also the state aviation director for FDOT. Bill now is in the private sector with his company, which is Aeropandion. Did I say it? Am I close? Okay, as best I could do with my southern accent, I guess. So, nonetheless, Bill is here to help us get better understanding of airports and their role within the transportation network with respect to economic development opportunities. Third, to Bill's left, thank you, is Carl Baker, and Carl's with the Port of Palm Beach. Carl and I have the good fortune of working together with the Palm Beach MPO on a regular basis, where Carl is the liaison for the Port of Palm Beach to public agencies like the Palm Beach MPO. Carl's the director of planning and development for the port, so his responsibilities are broad as well: strategic planning, land use policy, future transportation strategies, grant writing, and administration, as well as the extensive construction activities taking place at the port. So kind of soup to nuts at the Port of Palm Beach perspective. He's been with the port for about 15 years, and over that time, 25, sorry about that, 25 years. You looked younger, so at any rate. So over the 25 years Carl's been at the port, he's covered a whole range of projects, including security, IT, communications, and operations. Prior to coming to the port, he was a captain in the U.S. Army with tours in Korea, Germany, and Egypt. So an international perspective and a long view at the Port of Palm Beach and its relationships through the region. And then last but not least, my good friend Leslie Weatherall. Leslie's from FDOT and a fellow Gator, go Gators, a little jaw clap there. She started at FDOT in roadway design and then worked through the department and has landed now within the Strategic Intermodal System. So those of you who are in the business would know that the Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS, is the very broad piece of the transportation network that is specifically geared and prioritized for economic development. So of all the many facilities FDOT has, the strategic intermodal system is the one where the facilities bubble up that are key to economic development and expansion. Leslie has a broad range of experience within the district, really in every division, and is currently housed in the program management office. And so with that, we, in the interest of time and without a death by PowerPoint, which some of you know that can happen on occasion when I'm at the podium, instead, each of our panelists is going to talk for a minute about their perspective of the transportation network and how it relates to economic development. Starting with Leslie, who really has the most broad perspective, and then moving across the podium. Leslie?
Good morning. Thank you, Kim, for those kind words. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all today, and I hope that I'm able to share with you some interesting tidbits, I guess, about how the department does interrelate to the economic development of our communities. As Kim mentioned, the SIS, the Strategic Intermodal System, is really one of the big things that the department focuses on. Approximately 75% of our discretionary resources are allocated towards the SIS, and the SIS is made up of strategic corridors, hubs, and connectors. So for example, I-95 is what we consider a SIS facility because of its strategic nature. The Port of Palm Beach, a CIS facility because of its strategic nature. And then the connection of how you get from I-95 to the port is considered a CIS connector because we're connecting the CIS facility, I-95 in this case, to the hub, which is the port. So 710 in this case would be the CIS facility, the connector that's linking and bridging the gap there. And we do spend a lot of our funding resources on the facility in partnership with all of our partners in order to leverage as much funding as we have with the development that's going on around the state. It is a statewide competitive program, but at the district level, we prioritize what our needs are, and we work collaboratively with Tallahassee to try to move forward all of our needs here at the district level. It is also a 10-year program, which is different than how the department normally works. The department statutorily has a 5-year work program with all of our funding needs in that related to everything that we're doing, whether it's supporting other modes, whether it's supporting our preservation and maintenance of our facilities, or whether it's supporting the CIS facilities. But the CIS program in particular goes out an additional 5 years. So they're really looking long-term to what's going on in the community, in the development, and where they see those CIS needs really being needed to be addressed, if you will. So we have an office. We actually have dedicated employees in our office at the district level this is purely their focus to work with the community as well as with our central office to move these types of projects forward. One really big project of late that we've gotten approval for is the I-95 at Oslo Road interchange. For a long time, that was a project that we knew we needed, but we didn't have the resources for it. And finally, on our third try, we were able to justify the interchange, and the CIS program is helping us move forward that project to reality. So we're very excited about that. Just a couple of other quick things I wanted to touch on just briefly over and above the CIS is we do partner, of course, with our locals and our MPOs on their local priorities. So that's kind of a separate thing that we work on outside of the CIS to move forward all the local and community type improvements that then tie into that regional connectivity that kind of brings it all together. And I see a few familiar faces in the audience that I work with a lot on that, so thank you for your continued support. One other thing I do want to touch on very briefly is we do have a program that we partner with Enterprise Florida and DEO on. It's called the Economic Development Transportation Fund. And that's actually a program that agencies can partner with a business entity, a third party, to bring projects to their area to support a business that is trying to relocate or start anew in the area. For example, if you have a parcel, piece of property that you want to develop on, but you're landlocked and you can't get to the nearby roadway facility, the business entity can reach out to the local government at that location and then reach out to Enterprise Florida, apply for the connection of building a roadway, in this case, to get the business to the roadway. And it ultimately, if you're awarded it, it comes through the department kind of on the side to help fund it and make sure the transportation element gets built. So that's definitely a tool that's in our toolbox to move development forward, partnering not only with the department, but Enterprise Florida and DEO. And that's a very popular program that we have. That's actually managed out of my office, so I'm quite familiar with it. I don't want to belabor anything else, but I'll be happy to take any questions at this time, or my panel's members would like to pass on.
Yep, absolutely.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Kim, thank you for having us today. The Port of Palm Beach is coming off a very good year. It's actually the best year we've ever had in our history. We've had the record amount of containers went through last year. We had a record amount of cruise line passengers, and we made a record amount of revenue. So we're quite happy with that. We were able to finish up a number of major infrastructure projects. FDOT has been very nice to us in the last couple of years. We just finished off Slip 3. That was a rebuild of a slip that was initially built back in 1954, 1955. That was a $23.5 million project. That was done with 75-25 grants from FDOT. We've just started our Burst 17 project, which is $12.5 million, and that's 50-50 match with FDOT. We've gotten some grants to take down a building. We've got about another $1.5 million from FDOT. for their portion to do some rail improvements on port, and FDOT fully funded a off-port rail just right there on the FEC main line, which is on the west side of the port, where they spent $6.5 million and installed an additional set of tracks and some staging areas on the south side. So, like I said, everything has been, been a very good year for us. A lot of people always ask about how the Panama Canal and the new canal is going to affect us. It's not. The Panama Canal and the new locks is turning out to be something a little different from what a lot of people imagined. If you're thinking of just row after row of these giant mega container ships, which are officially now called Neo-Panamax. Everybody was saying post-Panamax for years, and when they opened the canal, they started calling them Neo-Panamax, so that's your word for the day. They're only getting 2 to 3 of those ships. They're only getting 2 to 3 Neo-Panamax ships a day through the new canal. And half of those, and only half of those, so 1.5, maybe 2 a day are going east, or going west, coming from the Far East, coming up to the East Coast. Over half the ships that are going through the Panama Canal right now, the large ones, are going to the Far East, and it's LNG ships that are coming out of Louisiana, carrying LNG to China and every place on the other side of the Pacific, which is completely opposite from what people thought was going to happen. So again, not a lot of traffic, and half the traffic is going the other way. Miami, the Port of Miami, spent $1.3 billion getting ready for their first ship. So a lot of money has been spent by a lot of people getting ready for these, and so far the economic return on investment's just not there. So again, the long view. And also I was asked just to speak briefly about the Port of Fort Pierce, kind of like Kermit the Frog, where it's hard to be green. It's hard to be the Port of Fort Pierce. They're small. They don't have a lot of money. There's a lot of community angst over them growing any. Although they did get a grant 2 weeks ago from the Florida Ports Council for about $250,000 to move forward with some of their studies, and they've got about a $7 million program that they're trying to do to where they want to rebuild one of their docks and perhaps kind of put in a nice high-end restaurant or something. They're still kicking around what they want to do, but again, it all goes back to you need a lot of money to do this.
You can sit up, sit back.
These are the most comfortable chairs you'll ever sit at, and I was getting ready to go to sleep there. Joe Griffin had invited me to come and talk to you about aviation, and he said, take 15, 20 minutes, and I got here, and I said, she said, no, you have 3 minutes, so I'm going to do this as fast as I can. First, I wanted to thank George Stokas, the airport director here, who also is sitting on the Florida Airports Council, and I just retired from Florida Airports Council, and I wish I'd had more time to work with George, but we'll talk about aviation, and the most important thing is the lady sitting over here. It's the grant person for the Florida Department of Transportation. Airports in Florida are lucky. The state has the largest state aviation program in the nation. You have one commercial service airport, Palm Beach International, and everything else is general aviation. The state of Florida can give 50-50 matching grants to commercial service airports, but they can go as high as 90-10 for general aviation airports, and that's very important. Very few states in the United States have the ability to do that. And if you're looking at trends, I would say it's very stable at the Florida DOT right now. Now, the legislature will come into session in the spring, and that could all change. But when you have a 5-year work program, you sort of know what you're going to do over the next 5 years, and that's very good. With George, Florida Airports Council, and the local governments, they need to continue to monitor that DOT equitably distributes the money that comes into the state. The state has a aviation gas tax. It used to be as high as 6.9 cents a gallon, but last year the legislature cut it in half. But they also did away with all the exemptions that the airlines got, so it's revenue neutral. I don't see any real big impact in that. The second funding entity at airports is the Federal Aviation Administration. Most states, the FAA gives airports in the state more money than the state does. But in the state of Florida, it's the other way around. FDOT will partner with local governments and do a project without any state participation, federal participation. And that's very important because the FAA can be very difficult to work with. It looks like with this next election, you're not really going to know what the FAA is going to be able to do because they have to give grants to airports, they have to fund the FAA, the TSA, Homeland Security. I mean, there's just a lot of needs that the FAA has. I would like to sort of go from the funding, which I think is very important. I mean, you have good airport directors in the area. They've got local government funding, they've got some state funding and some federal funding. But I think the most important thing that I can say is, and since my background is economic development and airport management, is the aerospace industry in Florida. Aerospace industry in Florida is the epicenter of aerospace in the United States. And I know Mr. Ketchum talked about aerospace. He didn't really talk a lot about aviation, although these two are lumped together. So if you look at aviation and you look at our airport, Melbourne International, we have Embraer. Thanks to the state of Florida, we got a grant to help build them their facility. They're building a $50 million facility. They're going to go from 5 aircraft delivered per month to 12 aircraft delivered per month, and that's a very big thing. And we have Northrop Grumman. Northrop Grumman announced that they have a $500 million expansion to build the next generation of strategic bombers. They're going to hire 1,800 people at an average salary of over $100,000 a person. So I can just show you, in the Space Coast where we live, the aerospace industry is important. And I believe in the Treasure Coast, that's the same way. The one thing I was going to say early this morning when Mark Wilson talked, I was going to talk about incentives. Because last year the governor asked for a couple $100 million in incentive money, and the legislature said, no, I don't think so. So this year he's going to go back. He was at yesterday we had a ribbon cutting for Aeromod, which is a maintenance repair organization. They do maintenance on large jet aircraft, and the governor was there and announced that he's given us another $5 million grant to build a second MRO hangar for this company. So it's really good. I think you're close enough to the space industry that aerospace is going to be throughout here. If you look at what you already have, you have Piper in Vero Beach, you've got aerospace companies in Palm Beach County. So I really believe that's I hate to say low-hanging fruit because it's certainly not. And this is the last thing I was going to really touch on was back when, and I've done economic development at sort of the statewide level, we're competing with all the southern states, and the southern states have lots of money that they will give to an aerospace company to move to their state. We need in the state of Florida, whether you want to call it incentive money or you want to call it P3 money for private partnerships with the public entities, there needs to be money that can help these companies like Embraer. If it had not been for the state, investing in Embraer in that building, along with the city and the county and Brevard, they wouldn't be in Melbourne. And they hire 300 people. I mean, it's really good business, but the state has to have a seat at the table, more or less. And so hopefully during the 2017 session, the legislature will grant, if not incentive money, public-private partnership money, so that when aerospace companies want to come to Florida, we have some ability to help with the infrastructure. We don't have a lot of extra hangars, right, George, in the state of Florida. So when a company wants to come, they have to build a hangar. Would you rather them spend their money building the hangar, or you work with them in a partnership so they can put their money into building the aircraft, the spacecraft, the rockets that they're going to build? 3 minutes, did I get it? I don't know if I got it.
Yeah, pretty close.
Probably close.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us here. I'm here to speak a little bit about rail, and the rail lines are a great asset, we think, for economic development in this region, as in the state of Florida. There are 4 assets, really, that serve this area, CSX and FEC being 2 obvious ones. Then we've got the South Central Florida Express, which sort of loops around the south and west side of the lake. And FEC has a K-branch line that connects that South Central Express to its FEC main line. Those are strategic facilities, obviously for the state and for this region, and provide a great deal of access, especially for heavy goods, to markets and so on. And the good news is that there's a lot of capacity, added capacity in that system to support future growth. We heard about the on-port rail facilities at Port of Palm Beach, and that is a fairly easy addition for Fort Pierce as well. We've got a rail yard just south of Fort Pierce on the FEC line that serves the Walmart distribution facility, but could also serve other industry in that area. And so that's a pretty good picture for those assets. Despite that extra capacity, additional investments are being made by the department and other partners, particularly in terms of crossover connections that would allow some freight rationalization and improve efficiency of freight movements on those lines in the future. So the base is there for future growth. In terms of trends, first of all, to put rail in perspective, in terms of freight movements, rail currently serves sort of 10 to 15% of freight movements within the state and the region, and that's anticipated to continue. So the growth that we heard about earlier, significant population growth and economic growth for the state will translate, we think, roughly equitably in terms of that 10 to 15% mode share for rail. In recent years, the last 5 years, the number of trains passing through this area has increased, but it still is not back to the levels that it was in about 2006 before the crash. And so we anticipate those volumes to continue to increase in the coming years as the population and the economy continues to grow. The primary drivers for that freight rail traffic is trade out of the South Florida ports to the Caribbean basin, as well as consumer demand within our state. And northbound traffic tends to focus on aggregate mined in Miami-Dade County, which is used in the construction industry throughout the state and further north into Georgia and so on. So in the past couple of years, that's a big contribution to that increase in traffic. So that paints a little bit of a picture. We've got a couple of constraints that I think you guys are aware of. The at-grade crossings are a constraint, as are whistle zones for trains. Water crossing bridges serve as somewhat of a constraint. And then there are a number of unknowns, the Panama Canal being one of them, trade with Cuba being another one, and development of logistics centers or inland ports within the state of Florida. Those all have the potential to impact rail traffic through this region and in the state as a whole.
Yeah, super. So a couple discussion questions, but I'm going to try my best to create an opportunity for audience questions as well, because there's a lot of information this morning and not as much time as I think that we could ever have to cover as much data. So with respect to Mr. Wilson's comments this morning, one of the themes I think that we heard and also see on a regular basis is kind of the inter-regional connectivity that we need. Because if we have resources in different regions, and the better we connect, the more competitive we are. Are there key investments or key pieces to facilitate those inter-regional connections that we should think about as we're thinking about priorities for the region going forward? So maybe Peter, do you want to take a swing?
I think that the facilities are there currently in terms of rail for inter-regional connections. I think the next big question is about trying to provide long-term additional capacity that could be moved to the west of these centers of population. There is talk in South Florida of a rail corridor paralleling US 27 that would sort of tee into the south end of the state that could then connect to that South Central Express. And then could also serve this area with that K branch line up to Fort Pierce. But I think that's long-term future given the capacity we have in the system today.
Okay. Brother?
I think I'd like to turn around a little bit from a regional perspective. I represent Melbourne International Airport, Orlando Melbourne International Airport now, and you guys have the chance to fly either from our airport or Palm Beach, and I would just hope you fly from Melbourne.
I'd have to go also with rail. Port of Palm Beach, we were kind of one of the we were the big push initially behind trying to get an inland port going somewhere in Palm Beach County, and unfortunately it kind of flamed out for a number of reasons. But if we could get rail up US 27, it would make a huge difference, and that would be the big driver towards getting an inland port set up.
So I'll touch again on the SIS, the Strategic Intermodal System, and I know I mentioned it previously, but that program is a 10-year program, so we're already looking out 10 years. And then the other plug I'll make is we partner with our MPOs who look out even further with their long-range transportation plans, and they do a tremendous amount of public outreach as a part of that, so we need to continue to partner together to bring together those local and regional priorities to then make them the connectivity around the state.
Along the line of partnerships, hang on to the mic for a sec, so we'll go back this way. So along the line of partnerships, one of the things that we see over time, especially in the area of transportation, is more 3Ps, right? Public-private partnerships in a variety of modes. If you were using a crystal ball and looking forward, where do you see the opportunities to do things maybe differently or better in 3Ps to make a more efficient system for the transportation network?
So District 4, the district I represent, that's Broward, Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River. We have successfully done a 3P project in the Broward County region. That's the 595 corridor. And around the state, we have a couple of others going on as well in some form or fashion. 3P is under a very specific statute on how we can implement it. So there are some constraints associated with it. But I see us going more in the way of, again, partnering with our MPOs and our local partners to bring in what those local and regional needs are, and then working with our community with us through the various offices we have at the district. We have all our different modes as well represented here. We're not just all about highways, even though that's what I'm here to represent today. So I think we've got a lot of tools in our toolbox, and how we move that forward and partner together is really the key.
3Ps don't especially apply to us because we're built out. But where our two partners, our two really big partners are FDOT for the grant money, and the other huge one is the United States Army Corps of Engineers, because they're the ones that are responsible for keeping the channel dredged and to allow commerce to go. In the previous panel, there was the discussion about what keeps you up at night, and for us, it's getting the channel blocked. Right now, a couple weeks ago, we had a hurricane. Fortunately, we missed, but last time we had a hurricane blow through here, we had two sailboats came into our slip and sank. So that kind of gummed up the works, and right now the surf is blowing over the top of the sand transfer plant at the Palm Beach Inlet, and you can almost see the bottom starting to come up. So that's the thing, is the channel blockage with a vessel or the channel blockage with just sand building up. Those are the biggies, and that's what we need the Army Corps of Engineers for. And then like I said, they're a predominant partner in keeping the port open, which is how you feed the Caribbean.
I think I'd like to go back and talk about the Embraer project, since that's a classic 3P project. It was Embraer provided funding, State of Florida provided funding, Space Florida. Has Dale Ketchum left yet? Hey, Dale's in the back. Space Florida. By the way, you guys owe us $8 million, but we'll talk about it later. They don't really. The state hasn't told them to give us the money yet, but as soon as they do, we're going to get a check from Space Florida, City of Melbourne, Brevard County, and the Melbourne Airport Authority. So, this is a classic example of how if you put enough brains together, they can build a $50 million project that, benefits the local economy, the regional economy, and the state economy. And if we could do 2 or 3 more projects like that in Melbourne, and George could do 2 or 3 down here, and we could have 2 or 3 in Sebastian, we'd all be really happy people.
In terms of rail, I think there have been some good examples of joint developments, such as P3s between the department and the railroads at the ports, both Port Everglades and Palm Beach, that have provided additional capacity for growth and efficiency. So I think the model's in place for that.
Okay. Questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
He's already had a question. Can I get one? Thank you. My question would be neither of these, only your answer. I haven't had time to look up whether or not we have a state infrastructure bank in Florida.
State infrastructure bank, yes.
Yes, and Kim spoke about 3P, so I can't ask about those.
Okay.
Where do we stand on our state infrastructure bank? I come from the marine industries. We've got a lot of infrastructure. We need a lot of money. Thank you.
Okay, so the State Infrastructure Bank, commonly referred to as the SIB, it's actually managed through Tallahassee central office, so I'll be honest with you, I don't know too terribly much about it. But essentially, what limited knowledge I do have with some projects is, for example, a local agency wants to do a project and they don't have enough funding to do the project in the time frame they want. They reach out, they apply for a SIB loan, which is what it is, it's a loan. They're a recipient of that, and then they utilize that funding resource to build the project and then pay back the loan at whatever terms are agreed upon with the State Infrastructure Bank at that time. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I apologize, I don't know too terribly much about that.
Well, if the others would speak to the issue of other funding resources, that resources are constrained, and our first speaker told us there'll be no money coming from the Fed. So in light of public-private partnerships or SIVs, what other instruments, actors, and vehicles are there for us to go forward in doing what it is we do?
Sure, give me the microphone. Aviation will talk about it. What was the question again? I'm kidding. We're going to apply for a SIB loan, as a matter of fact, to acquire some land adjacent to Melbourne International Airport, because it is a loan program and it's a 10-year payback. It's pretty good money. But I want to go back to the beginning of what I said. The best funds there are the gas tax that we're getting that go to the State Transportation Trust Fund that DOT administers, and they give it to the airports. The Florida Ports Council has done extremely well in the last 4 years. Hundreds of millions of dollars for the Ports Council. So the state of Florida is lucky. There is, I hate to say there's adequate money for all of the modes to get everything they want, but it seems to work fairly well. If you rely on the federal government for funding, I think you're going to have a really tough time. But in the state of Florida, there's enough state resources, I think, to take care of most of our needs and probably all of our strategic needs.
Okay, this gentleman.
Recently moved about 4 months ago from Greenville, South Carolina area. One of the greatest economic impacts there, having BMW, Michelin, GE, and all of the subsidiaries, was the inland port. It's helped Amazon in Spartanburg and several of the other surrounding cities and counties to Greenville. So hearing some of the talk about rail transportation, inland port possibilities, are you targeting any specific manufacturing companies, engineering, that could be coming into the area as it relates to having an inland port for distribution centers?
And Carl?
As I was saying earlier, the Port of Palm Beach was kind of the big push behind getting an inland port set up, and unfortunately, it just flamed out a couple of years ago. Florida Crystals had a big push. They had some land that they owned that was set aside. They were going to develop an inland port. They pushed real hard, and they just couldn't get traction at all on it. There was another private group that had about 3,500 acres to the west side of Tradition up in Port St. Lucie, and they went out and hired every high-end consultant in the country to make this happen. and the same thing happened. It just flamed out, and they just could not get any traction. There's probably a number of issues, and some of it is probably a lot of short-sightedness on the side of some people, but we're just not there yet. Everybody recognizes the need for it, but nobody wants to be first down here.
Okay. And the industry development probably is more relevant to the EDC roles in the region than the providers. So with that, I'm going to have to say thank you to our panel. We are out of time, but all ready for the next panel, which is on education.